Okay, so our camera abruptly stopped yesterday, so I'm going to back up just a little bit so we make sure we get what we needed to. We're on Chapter 10, Mystery, Mayhem, and Mud. I couldn't believe my eyes. Was it all a dream? I asked Chester. Of course it wasn't, he said. Now, come on, we've got to move fast. I was still blinking in disbelief when I heard a howl that sounded like the one in my dream. Echoing eerily, it sent a shiver all through me. Howard and Heather, I explained. It's them, isn't it, Chester? They're the ones, aren't they? Yes, yes, he answered impatiently. It's been them all along, hasn't it? Come on, Harold, move. As I was pulling myself to my feet, I heard a voice call out, "They're gone!" Chester, I cried in amazement. This is just like my dream. The echo, the voice, everything. What's happening? Who just said they're gone? Harrison, he replied quickly as he pushed against my legs, which were still sitting, by the way, with the top of his head. No more questions, Harold. Just follow me. We've got to get the others. And help Harrison find Howard and Heather, I added. But Chester was already out the door and couldn't hear me. By the time I found him, he was already scratching at the door of Lyle's bungalow. Lyle was talking in his sleep. Oh, yeah? He was mumbling. Says who? Think you're a tough guy, eh? Psst, Agent 47X, Chester whispered. Lyle's eyes popped open. He regarded Chester with a look of total befuddlement. Wake up, Chester commanded. Something inside Lyle snapped into focus. What is it? Agent 37B1943X10YKLB97? I think he would have gone on till morning if Chester hadn't cut him off. A secret mission. Follow me, he said. Lyle flipped open his door and crawled out. He looked stealthily out of slitted eyes and kept low to the ground as Chester led the way to Taxi's bungalow. Don't let Harrison see you, Chester hissed back at us. But why? I started to ask, when Chester cut me off with a sharp shh. We continued creeping across the muddy compound until we arrived at Taxi's. He was wide awake and looked out at us as if he'd been half expecting our arrival. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, he said in greeting. Can't a soul get any sleep around this place? What's going on anyways? Ask Chester, I replied. Okay, Taxi said, and then went with a start. He exclaimed, Chester! Shh, Chester retorted. Chester! Taxi cried again, but this time in a tiny voice. You're back! Yes, I'm back. But how? I'll explain later. Right now, we've got more important things to deal with. How do I know you're not a ghost? Taxi went on. Do something so I'll know you're not a ghost. How would it be if I bit your nose? Chester hissed through clenched teeth. Would that be proof enough for you? Taxi thought a moment. Yes, he said. And then, yes, I guess that would do it. Agent 35HBO 7575 NFL 13YXX42. Hike! Taxi cried. What is it, Lyle? Chester asked, turning his head. Can we get this operation underway? I was in the middle of a great dream. Chester shook his head in dismay. What a crew! I should have done this myself. Done what? I asked. I still don't understand. There was a crash of thunder and in the accompanying lightning. I could see Harrison standing several yards away. Chester noticed too and motioned to us to huddle together and keep our voices down. Taxi crept out of his bungalow and put his head close to mine. Howard and Heather are somewhere nearby, Chester told us. We have to get to them before it's too late. Help! Howl's out now, I thought. What should we do? I asked as the rain quieted to a steady drizzle. Just wait, Chester ordered. For what? Asked Taxi. For a sound that will tell us where they are. Thinking he meant their howls, I was not at all prepared for what I heard next, or for its significance. My ears perked up as tiny yips resounded softly through the murmur of the rain. It's happened, Chester said softly. What has? Shh, listen. I did as Chester bade me, but what I was listening for, I didn't have a clue. The yipping sound continued, echoing as if from a great distance, and yet I had the feeling it was coming from some place very near. That's it, Chester cried. I know where they are. Let's go. At that very same moment, Harrison shouted, I know where you are, you little devils. Now I've got you. Chester and Harrison both ran to the corner of the compound near Howard's bungalow. I was relieved to see that Chester no longer cared whether or not Harrison saw us. After all, if we were going to help him, he may as well know about it. Chester, Harrison cried out, as he and my feline friend reached the same spot at the same time. Where did you come from? I imagine that it must have been quite a shock to Harrison's system to see Chester return from the dead, but he appeared to be so determined to find Howard and Heather that he didn't dwell on it. Never mind, he muttered as he began pulling up a blank on the back fence. I'll deal with you later. Right now, I've got to get this off. The plank, which was somehow loose to begin with, tore off suddenly in Harrison's hands and fell to the side. At first, I couldn't see anything, but then Harrison shined his flashlight through the opening in the fence, and what I beheld on the other side amazed me. There inside the storage shed, There inside the storage shed, their eyes gleaming in panic at the sudden intrusion, were Howard and Heather. A discarded rain pipe ran along the ground from where they sat to the opening in the fence. No doubt that accounted for the echoing effect of their howling, I reasoned. As for the yipping sound of moments before, that was quickly accounted for too. For there, next to Heather, huddled 5 or 6 squirming newborn puppies. The yips, no longer amplified by the rain pipe, were as tiny as they themselves. In the glare of Harrison's light, Howard began to bark. Harrison laughed. Sorry, old boy, he said, but you're going to have to come with me. Jump him, Chester shouted. Taxi, go for his ankles. Harold. But Chester, I stammered, I thought we were supposed to help Harrison find Howard and Heather. Weren't they the ones we were here for? Yes, of course, Chester snapped. But not because they're murderers, don't you see? Harrison's the one. And it's Howard and Heather he's been after the whole time. Well, I didn't see it at all, of course, but I decided this was not the time for further discussion, particularly not when I looked up and saw Harrison glaring down at me. What are you all doing here anyway? He uttered in a low, threatening voice. Get out of here, all of you, move. We sat, riveted to our spots. Suddenly, Harrison lunged at me. I didn't know which way to turn. Jump, Agent 16IQ, Lyle shouted in my direction as he leaped onto Harrison's shoulders. I jumped. Harrison laughed, and he landed face first in a big puddle. "Muff," he said, or something to that effect, as he lifted his head out of the murky water. Get off of me, you silly cat. He tried to shake Lyle loose, but Lyle was going nowhere. The game is up, NY7, Lyle cried out. Your spring spine days are over. He dug his claws in to get a firmer hold, and Harrison let out a yelp. He struggled to his feet. Lyle held on tight. "Taxi!" Chester cried out. "The ankles! I'll join Lyle and Harold." "Yes," I asked. I wasn't very good at rough stuff, so I wasn't sure what I could do to help. "Bark!" Chester commanded. "But Chester, you know how I hate the sound of barking." "Bark!" Chester ordered again. I wasn't sure what good it would do, but I did as I was told. Loudly I barked. Howard joined in. Chester jumped up onto Harrison's back, and Taxi began nipping at his ankles. "Hey, what's going on here?" Harrison cried. "Get off of me! Ouch!" Chester must have gotten in a good one. "What's with you animals all of a sudden?" "Taxi! Get away from my feet!" Harrison kicked at Taxi, who fell over backwards. "Are you okay?" I asked, concerned that he'd hurt himself. "I'm fine," Taxi answered. He broke into a smile. "Isn't this fun?" he asked, and then he dove for Harrison's feet again. "Break his thumbs!" Lyle was shouting gleefully. "We'll teach him a thing or two." "Attaboy, Lyle," Chester said encouragingly. "Come on, Harold. What happened to the barking?" "Oh, yeah. Woof, woof, woof." I couldn't help thinking how dumb I sounded. But unfortunately, a dog's vocabulary is limited. Just then I heard a car pull into the driveway. Maybe woof wasn't so dumb after all. It seemed to have done its job. "Okay, Harrison, that's enough," Dr. Greenbrier shouted as he came to the gate of Chateau Bow Wow. Harrison froze to the spot. His eyes widened in amazement as his mouth fell open, and his flashlight fell to the ground. The light went out. They were following Dr. Greenbrier in through the gate. Max, Georgette, and yes, it had to be Louise. There was a long moment of silence, and then Jill's voice cut through it like a knife. "Harrison, how could you?" she said at last. Harrison mumbled something under his breath as Jill and Dr. Greenbrier moved in closer to confront him face to face. Lyle and Chester hung stubbornly from Harrison's shoulders. "I only hope, Harrison," Dr. Greenbrier said, "for your sake as well as theirs, that no harm has come to any of these animals." "When I think of how I trusted you," Jill interjected. How did, Harrison stuttered. "Oh, I knew you were up to something after I called you tonight, Harrison," Jill answered. "You were so strange on the phone. Nervous and jumpy. I never heard you like that before. And then, well, I thought about how weird it was that you were here instead of home in the first place. I mean, that dedicated you're not." "I never should have answered the phone," Harrison said weakly. "Yes, that was your first mistake. And then on the way over here, we passed your house and find the dogs barking outside your window." "I don't know what's going on," Dr. Greenbrier said, "but you and I have to talk, Harrison. First, I want to take a look at everyone and get them back into their bungalows. I'll check on Howard and Heather and the kids. If they're all right, we'll leave them where they are for now. Harrison, wait inside the office until I come in. I want a full explanation." And then, and here he paused dramatically, staring into Harrison's eyes, "then we'll decide your fate." Harrison hung his head as Dr. Greenbrier moved beyond him and through the opening in the fence. Jill stayed where she was. "I just can't believe you'd do such a thing," she said. her eyes connecting with the top of Harrison's unruly thatch of hair. "What got into you anyway?" she demanded. "Was this how you were going to make $1 million? By lying, kidnapping, murder, and on top of everything, making it look like it was all my fault? I can't believe it, that's all. I just can't believe you're capable of such evil." Harrison continued to stare at the ground, avoiding Jill's eyes. "Well," she asked, "don't you have anything to say for yourself?" Harrison shrugged and lifted his head. "You can't blame a person for trying." Jill just shook her head slowly and watched as Harrison shuffled off toward the office door. Then she moved away to join Dr. Greenbrier in the storage shed. Chester and Lyle jumped down from Harrison's shoulders, and Taxi came over to me with a piece of Harrison's sock hanging from his mouth. A souvenir of his night of bravery, no doubt. When he reached the office door, Harrison turned back and sighed heavily. I almost felt sorry for him, and then turned to Chester to tell him so. "Don't waste your pity," Chester replied. "When I tell you about Harrison, you're not going to have such a soft spot in your heart for him." Just then, Louise walked over to me. "Scott," she said to me softly. I wanted to remind her that my name was Harold, but she continued before I could say anything. "Scott, I know you have held out hope that we'd get together, but I am going back to Chip. He wants me, and, well, I am wanting him. I am going to forgive and forget, no matter what has been between him and Lisa. Forgive and forget, Scott. I hope you can understand." And she walked back to Max's side. Chester and I turned to each other. "What terrible thing did Harrison do to Louise?" I asked in shock. "Mind control?" "Worse. 2 days of afternoon television." I looked back at Louise and a feeling of horror overwhelmed me. Chester was right. There could be no pity for Harrison.